everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
MarvelGodzilla starting as a Level-Two Mutant. Chapter 96 to 108, 96. 1,270 words. In a seaside villa on the California coast. Sir, my apologies for disturbing you. Inside the enormous laboratory, which looked like absolute chaos, a gentle male mechanical voice suddenly rang out. Jarvis, haven't I told you not to interrupt me when I'm focused on my work? Tony Stark frowned and lifted his head from a pile of parts, his face full of irritation. Not far from him, a red and gold Iron Man suit lay on the floor in utterly miserable condition. It was covered in dents of all sizes, and even its once polished paint job had been scraped beyond recognition. Countless fragments and components were scattered all over the ground. My apologies, sir. Jarvis apologized obediently. It is only that, according to your previous instructions, you should now be departing for Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. You placed this matter at a higher priority than repairing the armor. Oh? The impatience in Tony Stark's eyes vanished instantly. He scrambled up from the floor at once. Fenris is back. Yes. Jarvis answered simply. Didn't that mutant scientist build some kind of device that keeps satellites from seeing the real image inside the X-Mansion, so all they get is a fake overlay instead? Tony slapped the grease off his hands and casually tossed aside the filthy jacket he had been wearing. During the period when you were recovering at the school, you bribed quite a number of mutant children. Jarvis reported everything honestly. Just now, you received a message saying that Cyclops, Scott, has returned to the school. And although Fenris has not shown himself, if nothing unexpected has happened, he should also be at the school now. Who would have thought those kids would be more useful than satellites? Tony chuckled. Then he immediately ordered, get the spare Mark III ready. We're leaving now. I've been preparing for this long enough. It's time to give Fenris a one-of-a-kind Iron Man shock. You will certainly succeed, sir. New York, X-Mansion. Inside the training grounds reserved exclusively for the X-Men, a massive portal silently spun into existence. As Magneto withdrew the force field surrounding the group, the light around them twisted briefly. In the next instant, dozens of figures appeared one after another and filed through the dimensional gate. Looks like we arrived at just the right time. Ororo and Logan are training the children. Professor X immediately looked toward the field. Inside the training grounds, dozens of Sentinel robots over 3 meters tall were firing at full capacity, unleashing every kind of attack they had against the X-Men without the slightest restraint. After Hank repaired and modified them, a small number of 19th-generation Sentinels turned out to be ideal training tools, perfect for helping the students familiarize themselves with the combat patterns of these unusual machines. As the battle reached its most intense stage, everyone inside was so focused that none of them noticed Fenris and the others arriving. Bobby, watch out! 3 towering Sentinels were pressing in on Bobby step by step. Gritting his teeth, he poured out thick clouds of frost from his hands, struggling to slow them down. In a blind spot he failed to notice, one of the steel-bodied Sentinels quietly extended a blade from its right arm and viciously thrust it toward him. A small figure suddenly burst up from underground. Before Bobby could react at all, he was yanked straight below the surface, narrowly avoiding the strike by a hair's breadth. Thanks, Kitty. When the two of them resurfaced some distance away, Bobby finally patted his chest in lingering fear. No problem. The battlefield pressure was immense. Kitty Pryde only nodded before sinking back underground once more. Bobby snapped back to attention. Before long, another 5 Sentinels were already closing in on him. I seriously don't know how Mr. Fenris managed to beat monsters like these. Bobby let out a sigh. His powers flared again, sending out a sweeping blizzard of frost, while his arms gradually transformed into something like crystalline ice. Within moments, the 5 Sentinels were completely frozen solid. But before Iceman could even take a breath of relief, the outer shells of those Sentinels began burning at a visible rate. It was not long before the thick layers of ice quietly melted away. John. I am never teaming up with you against these things again. Seeing that, Bobby barked out a frustrated complaint while immediately raising his guard again. Bobby, don't make excuses for your own weakness. A howling gust swept over Bobby's head, carrying a blast of scorching heat. Two thick pillars of flame surged from Pyro's palms, propelling him rapidly through the air. 7 sentinels, their bodies still coated in frost, were chasing close behind him. But amid the roaring flames, the temperature kept rising higher and higher. One after another, the machines let out shrill metallic groans under the relentless heat, and before long, they all crashed to the ground. Bobby, the power you bring out of your abilities is way too limited. Is that because you've been too distracted by dating? Pyro descended from the air, looking teasingly toward Rogue, who was struggling to evade the encirclement of several sentinels not far away. That's only because Mr. Fenris keeps giving you extra lessons. Bobby clenched his teeth, and held the line against the 5 sentinels attacking him. Why don't you hurry up and help? You say that like he never taught you anything. I'm coming. John's strength has been advancing by leaps and bounds lately. He'll soon become a powerful X-Man who can stand on his own. Watching the battle in silence, Magneto nodded with satisfaction. Charles, the teamwork between these children is very good. With Storm and Wolverine covering from the rear, and with Hank's modifications ensuring these training sentinels could not cause real harm, not only Iceman and Pyro but also Colossus, Nightcrawler, and the others were putting in excellent performances. This is the future we've been protecting all along. Professor X smiled faintly. He was just as pleased inside, though his tone shifted as he continued. The problem is that what they're facing now still isn't the strongest sentinel in Bolivar's hands. That is something even Logan would have trouble dealing with. They still need some time to continue growing under our protection. Magneto nodded, completely in agreement with his old friend. Come on. Better not disturb them. After watching quietly for a while, Professor X turned around and left the training room first. We gained quite a lot this time, and those people are carrying plenty of intelligence in their heads too. So we'll need some time to properly digest these gains and plan the next phase. Fenris, do you want to come with me and do a few earth-shaking things? Seeing Charles walk ahead alone with the captured criminals, Magneto's eyes shifted. He deliberately slowed his pace, pulled Fenris back a few steps, and asked in a low voice. Earth-shaking things? Fenris rubbed his chin and thought for a moment. Looking at Magneto's mysteriously smug expression, he instinctively felt a bad premonition. You're not planning to pull some kind of stunt again, are you? No. Of course not. Don't worry. Magneto waved both hands repeatedly in denial. Do you remember those leads Nick Fury gave us last time about Bolivar's bases? Of course I remember. Why? Halfway through the sentence, Fenris suddenly jolted. You want to use this chance to wipe out a few more sub-bases, don't you? End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 97, 1448 words. Fenris, you really do get me. Seeing that Fenris had understood his meaning so quickly, Magneto nodded repeatedly. After the Arctic base was attacked, Bolivar already knows perfectly well that we've become aware of their existence. In that case, why should we keep hiding and sneaking around? We might as well cut loose and hit him before he can react. And most importantly, the last battle already proved it. The two of us together are fully capable of utterly overwhelming the previous generation of Sentinels. As he watched Fenris's eyes flicker after hearing him out, with the faintest trace of hesitation in his expression, Magneto grew anxious and hurried to add, besides, even if we run into a truly massive base, with your portals, we can leave whenever we want. With our mobility advantage, the moment those bases hiding in the shadows are exposed, the initiative is completely ours. And on top of that, this kind of constant harassment would greatly divide their attention and slow down their research progress. It's a win on every front. Well? Magneto looked at Fenris expectantly. I think. Just as Fenris nodded and was about to agree, Professor X suddenly spoke up, cutting off the conversation between the two of them. Eric, shouldn't we wait a couple of days before acting? Wait a couple of days? Magneto frowned, his eyes full of displeasure. How can something like this wait 2 days? Are we tired right now? Who knows what that man is plotting in the dark at this very moment? Every extra second means extra danger. Don't tell me you don't understand that. Eric, I admit you have a point, but you can't always be this rash. Looking at the irritable Magneto, Professor X shook his head and tried to reason with him in a calm voice. First, we finally managed to get clues about the enemy's main nest. Right now, they know us inside and out, while we still don't know enough about them. So why can't we wait until I've figured everything out before making plans? Charles. Seeing that Magneto was about to argue again, Professor X raised a hand, signaling for him to let him finish first. Second, you saw the combat strength of those children just now. Asking them to face tens of thousands of the newest Sentinel robots is absolutely impossible. And do you know how many sub-bases Bolivar has? After the Arctic base was destroyed, he still hasn't chosen to make a move for all this time. That means he's still lying low, waiting for the right moment to strike. Once the children are all equipped with vibranium suits, and their physiques have been enhanced by the heart-shaped herb, then we strike decisively and go straight for the Sentinel program's main base. As long as Bolivar dies, this crisis will naturally collapse on its own. Professor X looked straight into Magneto's eyes and spoke with calm, solid logic. Besides, if you push him too hard now, what if he panics and launches an all-out attack? Can we really hold back a massive swarm of Sentinels? We can. Just as Magneto, unconvinced by Professor X's argument, was about to fire back, a firm voice suddenly rang out. We can hold them. Fenris. Professor X turned his head and saw Fenris standing there as though nothing were amiss. Do you know what you're saying? I do, Professor. Fenris toyed with the exquisite little axe in his hand as he spoke, one word at a time. Even if Bolivar released thousands or tens of thousands of the newest Sentinels right now, I could hold them off by myself. You just need to protect the children. The Titan encyclopedia deep within his consciousness rippled faintly. Fenris glanced at the endlessly rustling pages within it. I can take responsibility for what I'm saying. Looking at Fenris's decisive expression, the certainty in his voice, and the absolute confidence radiating from him left both Professor X and Magneto dazed for a moment. The two of them looked at each other, then both turned back toward Fenris. In the next instant they smiled at the same time. What do you want to do? Professor X completely dropped the stubborn resistance he had shown his old friend just moments before. We're hitting the sub-bases, and we're definitely hitting the main base too. Not only are we going to fight, we're going to use this war to temper the X-Men and make them stronger. If I still had some hesitation before, then now I can tell you with complete certainty. Unless Bolivar can somehow pull out 100,000 Sentinels that are at least 25th generation or higher, we don't need to worry about a thing. The axe at his fingertips visibly expanded in his hand, then slammed heavily against the ground with a dull thunderous boom. Fenris said each word like a verdict. We will win. Good. Magneto slapped Fenris hard on the shoulder, the light in his eyes almost impossible to restrain. This is what we should have done from the start. Charles is always waiting, but when is there ever going to be a day when everything is completely ready? His emotions running high, the magnetic field around Magneto began surging wildly. Where his palm met Fenris's shoulder, two completely different magnetic fields collided. The charged particles gathering there actually sparked into a faint, gorgeous aurora. Fenris, we'll do it your way. Professor X gave Fenris a long, deep look, then led those captured criminals straight into the prison cells the school always kept prepared for Brotherhood members. Kid, are you really that confident? Magneto walked shoulder to shoulder with Fenris toward the outside, his mood suddenly turning exceptionally bright. If all that was just talk, you still have time to back out. What's said is said. There's nothing to take back. Fenris replied indifferently, I refuse to believe Bolivar can create some kind of supermaterial that can restrain you and still stop my axe. That's true. Magneto nodded and pulled his gaze back from the axe at Fenris's fingertips. There was something deeply strange about the weapon. Even though its main body was made of vibranium, it seemed to have undergone some sort of miraculous transformation. Changing size at will was one thing. But more importantly, it seemed to have perfectly synchronized with the bizarre magnetic field around Fenris. Not even Magneto's control over magnetism could interfere with the axe in the slightest. The two of them had just left the massive castle, and were preparing to head to Hank's lab when the scene before them made Fenris's pupils suddenly contract. What is this? The X-Mansion, already grand and magnificently maintained, now looked as though it had been completely reborn. Across its enormous grounds, the surrounding layout and buildings seemed to have been renovated from top to bottom. The original atmosphere and landscape had been preserved, but the new design was far more refined and elegant. At the same time, countless trucks were rolling steadily in from outside the grounds. Their trailers were packed with every kind of equipment imaginable, from teaching instruments to research machinery. Looking farther out, in the most remote corner of the school, even Fenris's 3-story reaction chamber had been completely rebuilt. Its height had increased by nearly 5 times. Where did Charles get this kind of money? Even Magneto could not help clicking his tongue in amazement as he looked around, marveling at his old friend's generosity. Renovating the entire school like this, how many millions of dollars must this be burning? Maybe Dr. Connors's research has entered a new phase. Fenris blinked. Even he was not entirely sure. Ever since Dr. Connors came to the school, the profits brought in by his research, combined with Professor X's handling of things, had grown increasingly staggering. Through his share alone, Fenris now had an impressive stream of income coming in even if he did absolutely nothing. Rumble just as the two of them were still staring in surprise, a tremendous roar suddenly rolled in from the distant sky toward the school. Almost as though it were deliberately showing off, when Fenris looked up, he saw an unmistakably gaudy red and gold figure streaking across the heavens, trailing a beautiful arc behind it. That's... Fenris focused his eyes. The instant he recognized the unmistakable silhouette, he suddenly failed to hold back a laugh. What is it? Magneto looked puzzled. Fenris grinned. I think I know who's rich enough to renovate the entire X-Mansion from top to bottom. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 98, 98. 1,256 words. Fenris. Open your eyes and take a good look at who's here. Before the man himself even arrived, his flashy voice had already carried over from afar. Not long after, Tony Stark, clad in a brand new Mark III Iron Man suit, appeared in Fenris's line of sight. Amid the thunderous roar of the thrusters, Tony skillfully controlled the armor and let himself hover in midair. He lowered his head slightly and looked down at Fenris and Magneto below. Seeing the two powerful mutants who had once dragged him back from death now tilting their heads up to look at him, Tony's vanity was instantly and enormously satisfied. Beneath the faceplate, the corners of his mouth shot upward. Standing before you now is a superhero, Iron Man. Tony raised both arms high while hovering in the air. To better highlight his magnificent pose, the shoulder plating of the armor opened, and dozens of expensive missiles shot directly into the sky. A chain of explosions rang out overhead, immediately drawing plenty of attention from around the school. Iron Man. He's here to bring us snacks again. Inside the school building, dozens of bright, clear eyes pressed against the windows. These mutant kids, all at that age when they loved excitement, let out a collective cry of amazement at the sight of the cool-looking Mark III. So, Seeing this, Magneto pressed his lips together and tilted his head toward the strangely expressionless Fenris beside him. I saved an idiot, didn't I? Yes. That's correct. Fenris nodded with complete sincerity. Hey. Up in the air, Tony heard both their voices clearly through the suit, and his face immediately darkened. Fenris, stop talking nonsense down there. If you've got the guts, come up here and test my Mark III. You? Fenris burst out laughing. Get down here already. Since we're friends, I was planning to give you a little something later. What little something? Don't want it. Fenris's dismissiveness instantly dealt a heavy blow to Tony's robust ego. He let out a scornful snort, then aimed both palms of his hands directly at Fenris. Whether you fight or not isn't up to you, Fenris. Try out the replicated beam blast I built. As Tony's words fell, two beams of intense light erupted from the suit's palms. Even under the full midday sun, those twin bursts of brilliance still lit up the space around Fenris as though it had turned glaring white. Now this is interesting. The moment Magneto realized there was a show to watch, he bent his knees and nimbly retreated into the distance. There was nothing about his movements that made him look like an old man. Tony, you're serious. At the very moment the brightness peaked, a tremendous blast of force slammed straight toward Fenris. Seeing Tony's posture and recognizing the familiar move, Fenris clicked his tongue softly, reached out with one hand, and drew the battle axe at his waist forward. It flew directly in front of him, and rapidly enlarged. The broad face of the axe shielded Fenris completely, easily blocking the incoming blast head-on. Boom! Fenris himself did not move an inch, but the surrounding lawn was not nearly as fortunate. Under the force of the massive impact, the grass was torn up by the roots, and the once carefully tended scenery was left in utter ruin. Aya! A cry rang out. When Fenris lowered the axe, he discovered that Tony Stark himself had failed to escape the all-directional shockwave. The armor below the elbows of the Mark III was already a complete mess, and Tony himself had been blown violently backward. Once the force dissipated, the suit no longer looked sleek and polished like it had moments ago. Instead, it looked battered and pitiful, like a piece of wreckage. Power system malfunction. External shell damaged. Weapons system offline. After the thrusters failed, Tony quickly began dropping from the sky. This is really humiliating. Hearing Jarvis faithfully report the damage to the armor, Tony's vision darkened. Helpless, he covered his face. Here at the X-Mansion, he was not in the slightest worried about actually injuring himself in the fall. What hurt more was that he had tried to show off, and instead made a fool of himself. Sure enough, as Tony fell faster and faster, Magneto raised a brow. A gentle force caught the heavy suit, and lowered Tony smoothly to the ground in front of them. You, honestly. Why would you try imitating this kid's power? Looking at Tony sprawled on the ground with all four limbs spread out, utterly unwilling to face reality, Magneto was the first to stroll over with great interest and knock on the suit's faceplate. We all know Fenris's power is ridiculous. It's one thing that your version doesn't even have 1% of his output, but you also blew yourself up like this. Was it worth it? It's actually not that bad. Tony's muffled voice came from inside the helmet. He let out a slightly dispirited sigh. I just may need to put a parachute inside the armor. Still, considering that he had once seen Fenris use this kind of large-scale attack only a single time, and had already managed to reproduce it with this much power, Tony was honestly very satisfied. The failure rate was a bit high, but otherwise he was pleased. I'm going to need your help again, Mr. Lencher. Tony tried several times to get up, but the Mark III was simply too heavy. Without mechanical arms to assist him, putting it on and taking it off was a genuine hassle. And with the suit damaged, that shortcoming was even more obvious. Magneto lifted a hand, and piece after piece of the Mark III came free, then reassembled itself neatly beside them. Stark, you really are a genius. Seeing the exquisite internal design of the suit, even Magneto could not help praising him in genuine surprise. This armor is excellently designed. Freed from the suit's restraints, Tony dusted off his backside and climbed to his feet. Watching Magneto casually manipulate the Mark III, as if it were second nature, Tony immediately forced out a rather awkward smile. "You're not bad yourself. Most people couldn't reassemble this that quickly from just one glance." "Well said." Magneto burst into laughter, suddenly feeling that this playboy was not nearly as difficult as the rumors claimed. Wasn't he showing excellent social instincts right now? "Fenris, long time no see." As Fenris strolled over from the distance at an unhurried pace, Tony's expression shifted. Acting as though he had not just attacked the man moments earlier, he casually held out a hand to him. "Thanks to you, I'm doing great." Fenris bared his teeth and leaned in close, his face darkening as he murmured into Tony's ear, "So you've already started researching how to replicate my powers? Tell me honestly. Have you also been secretly working on a whole set of weapons specifically designed to counter me?" How does he know? Fenris's words made Tony's back go suddenly cold. His expression froze, and then he hurriedly waved both hands. "Nothing like that. We're good friends. If I were researching anyone, I'd be researching Magneto, not you." Magneto had just been about to turn and leave. But the moment Tony's words reached him, the old man's footsteps slowed, and the look in his eyes changed at once. End of chapter. Get +30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 99, 99. 1,229 words. A misunderstanding. Tony suddenly felt a chill run down his back. With an awkward grin, he quickly dragged Fenris away. "I really think you'd be better off not talking badly about Magneto all the time," Fenris said as Tony pulled him all the way toward his newly transformed reaction chamber. "One of these days, you're going to get beaten up. It's fine. Magneto's already that old. Besides, he saved my life. There's no way I'd actually fight him." Remembering the sight of his suit being manipulated so easily by Magneto just now, Tony was already running through the feasibility of a carbon nanotube suit in his head. But outwardly, he answered with total indifference. "Besides, I'm a playboy, a billionaire. Armor's just a toy to me. TCH. Fenris took one look at him and immediately saw through the bravado. After giving him a deeply pitying glance, he said nothing more. It could only be said that prejudice in people's hearts was like a mountain. Magneto was still old, yes, but he was no longer the same Magneto as before. Tony would behave after taking one real loss. "Fenris, what do you think of that beam blast weapon of mine just now?" Tony abruptly changed the subject and looked at Fenris with eager anticipation. Ever since coming back from the Middle East, he had been updating and refining the Mark series while hunting terrorists, but at the same time, he had also been repeatedly studying Fenris's combat footage. If he could just feel his way across the river by following Fenris's example, how could the power of his suits possibly fail to improve? "Want the truth?" Fenris's eyes shifted, and he tossed the question back. "I do." Once he got the answer he wanted, Fenris immediately grinned. "The truth is, it wasn't very good. The sources of a Titan's power were varied to begin with. Trying to analyze them through science alone was almost impossible, even for a genius like Tony Stark. To be honest, I don't recommend you keep pursuing this, Fenris said kindly. You can imitate me all you want, but if you want exactly the same power expression, that's a dead end. It's basically impossible. With all that effort, wouldn't it be better to spend more time with Pepper? So that's how it is. Hearing Fenris's advice, Tony let out a sigh. During the research process, he had already realized as much himself. He just had not wanted to admit it. Now that Fenris had said it outright, Tony finally let go of the idea of a perfect replication. Still, if he could reproduce part of it through other technological means, the resulting power would already be astonishing. With that in mind, Tony, who had long prepared himself mentally, was not too upset. "Do you have a guy named Obadiah at your company?" Seeing that Tony had fallen silent, Fenris thought for a moment and suddenly asked. "Yeah." "Why?" Tony froze for a second. He had not expected Fenris to know his uncle's name. "Nothing much. Just be a little more careful around him." Thinking of how Tony probably still regarded Obadiah as a real uncle, Fenris found it hard to badmouth him directly to Tony's face, so he could only give an oblique warning. "Fenris, he's one of the elders I trust the most." Tony believed Fenris would not say something like that without reason, but he was still confused. "What, you think he'd hurt me?" "Nothing. Just keep your reactor safe." Fenris smiled casually and gave the warning anyway. Now that all the shrapnel had already been completely removed from Tony's body, the arc reactor in his chest no longer posed any threat to his health. On top of that, Tony now possessed new offensive capabilities he had never had before. Even if Obadiah really did cobble together Ironmonger, Tony would most likely have no real trouble dealing with it. All right. Tony did not think too deeply about it. As the two of them kept walking, a colossal building nearly 50 meters tall soon came into full view. "Fenris, this is the biggest gift I prepared for you this time." The moment they reached the entrance, Tony's excitement surged. He hurried forward and personally opened the doors for Fenris. "Want to take a look inside?" "A gift?" Fenris raised a brow. Seeing the smug look on Tony's face, Fenris smiled faintly and felt a warm stir in his chest. "Beep beep. Mr. Fenris, welcome back." As Fenris approached, a crisp female electronic voice rang out from the doors. The entrance immediately opened, revealing a spacious, brightly lit interior. "This is an AI I developed myself. It doesn't have a name yet." Noticing the surprise in Fenris's eyes, Tony pushed him through the entrance and introduced it. "You can name it yourself. From now on, all the building's security, operations, cleaning, and other logistical work will be handled by it. Of course, it can also be installed on various terminals. It's got a lot of functions. You can figure out the rest later." At an age like this one, the value of a top-tier artificial intelligence was beyond calculation. And yet Tony was willing to hand him a gold mine like this outright. Fenris was stunned. He truly had not expected that. "Then let's call it Titan." After thinking for a moment, Fenris settled on the name. "Artificial Intelligence Titan at your service." The pleasant female voice came from every direction. Seeing that, Fenris nodded in satisfaction. "I specifically designed the AI with a female personality, and then you go and give her a name like Titan." Tony sighed helplessly at his side. "Fenris, no woman is ever going to like you if you keep acting like this." "Titan sounds great. I like it." Fenris waved the comment off and curiously looked around. The building, nearly 10 stories tall, had an extremely distinctive design. From the ground floor all the way to the top, there were almost no partitions in the middle. Only the largest first floor had been divided into several sections by various elegant design elements. The sections did not interfere with one another at all, and the whole structure felt exceptionally spacious and grand. After a series of identity verifications, the two arrived at the first hall. 3 enormous arc reactors stood there in silence. Not far away, the reaction chamber Hank had originally built for Fenris had also been replanned by Tony and integrated harmoniously into the overall design. "This is..." Fenris's eyes widened. The value of giant arc reactors went without saying. Even Stark Tower housed only one, yet here there were 3 of them. "That's only part of it. Come over here and take a look at this." Tony was extremely pleased by Fenris's reaction. He grinned and pulled him toward another hall nearby. Compared to Hall 1's vast openness, this space was smaller, but it still covered several thousand square meters. And in the most eye-catching spot stood a gigantic custom-made display cabinet. Resting on it were dozens of miniature arc reactors, each one glowing softly. Their appearance and shape looked exactly like the reactor in Tony's chest. So many reactors. Fenris's eyes lit up instantly. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 100, 1,311 words. I heard from the others that you need to keep absorbing radiation to grow stronger, so I specially prepared these for you. This was hardly any kind of secret at the X-Mansion. Anyone paying even a little attention could find out easily enough. Tony stepped forward, casually took one of the reactors, and handed it to Fenris. Then, with a light tap, he pressed it against Fenris's chest. Want to see how it feels? As the reactor started up, a faint humming sound followed. Threads of warmth spread out from Fenris's chest. After Tony's deliberate modifications, a steady stream of radiation was released from within it, passing through Fenris's skin and into his body without affecting the surrounding area at all. Oh, that feels good. A wave of clear, all-encompassing comfort shot straight up Fenris's spine and into his head, making him shiver involuntarily. It felt as though he were soaking in a hot spring every second. After stretching lazily, Fenris's skin began turning rough at a visible rate. At the same time, right before Tony's eyes, his body started swelling in size. His tail lashed once, and his whole body instinctively curled up as his eyes narrowed in pleasure. What did it feel like to have a tail several times thicker than an adult man's waist, 10 meters long, and covered in sharp spikes suddenly whip toward you without warning? Tony felt his entire field of vision swallowed by shadow. A shrill tearing sound split the air, and the overwhelming sense of danger made his eyes widen instantly. He threw himself to the ground in a frantic tumble, only to see the massive tail stop dead and pull back at the very last instant before it struck him. Fenris. Tony patted his chest in lingering fright, glaring in annoyance. I'm still standing right here. Sorry, puny Tony. Didn't mean to scare you. The mountain-like gigantic figure vanished. After removing the arc reactor, Fenris held it in his hands and looked at it over and over, unable to put it down. Compared to the crude method of drawing radiation through dimensional gates before, the efficiency of the arc reactor was overwhelmingly superior. It was a complete mismatch, practically a dimensionality gap in performance. The sensation was so wonderful, so far beyond anything he had experienced before, that Fenris could not stop savoring it in his mind. Now, when he thought of the bulky old reactor Hank had built for him, even with all that delicious highly concentrated nuclear fuel packed inside, he found himself almost completely uninterested. As expected, Hank may be brilliant, but compared to Tony in this area, he still falls a little short. Fenris cheerfully pressed the arc reactor back onto his chest. As long as you like it, that makes all the preparation worth it. Fenris's reaction made Tony nod in complete satisfaction, pride written all over his face. After redesigning this place, the radiation shielding has been massively improved, and there's plenty of space too. It'll be enough for you to use for a long time. Thinking back to the overwhelming pressure that had flashed off Fenris just moments ago, combined with the change in his size, Tony said confidently, and if it's not enough later, I'll just expand it again for you. Once the reactors run out of energy, you can contact me through Titan anytime. Stark Industries offers unlimited supply. The moment he thought about how he had built this entire structure up to 50 meters tall in one go, Tony's confidence grew even stronger. No matter how unreasonable Fenris's powers were, there had to be a limit, right? If he really grew beyond 50 meters, then forget slowed neural transmission and delayed reactions. That kind of terrifying body weight alone ought to crush any living thing to death. If you're saying that, then I'm taking it seriously. Of course. I'm Tony Stark. I never go back on my word. Tony thumped his chest proudly. For me, this is nothing. The moment Fenris realized Tony was actually promising to cover his food and housing indefinitely, he laughed. The space before them immediately began swirling with fiery sparks. Come with me. You've seen the gift you prepared for me. Now let me show you the surprise I prepared for you. What? Tony froze, then followed Fenris through the dimensional gate with obvious curiosity in his eyes. I'm taking you to meet someone you've dreamed of meeting. Fenris smiled mysteriously. Deep beneath the X-Mansion, inside Hank's spacious private laboratory, a giant robot nearly 6 meters tall lay motionless in the center of the lab. The fine-scaled outer shell of the Sentinel had already been completely dismantled, exposing its complicated internal structure. Hank was crouched outside the machine's chest cavity, bent over and jotting something down. Hank, with the Wakandan data added in, we've finished analyzing the heart-shaped herb Fenris brought back. It's just that our environment makes large-scale cultivation extremely difficult. Not far away, dozens of heart-shaped herbs glowed faintly. Jean withdrew her gaze from the screen and called across the room to Hank. If we can't cultivate it on a large scale, how feasible is a smaller-scale approach? Hank asked in return. It's possible, but we'll need vibranium to make it work. Jean gave him a definite answer. That's acceptable. This isn't Wakanda, after all. Hank nodded. What about the vibranium? When can we start using it in our suits? And how much longer will development take for those vibranium weapons? Soon. With Wakanda's huge data reserves backing us, we'll be able to do all of that very quickly. Jean smiled as she answered. Fenris really helped us out this time. That's excellent. No time to waste. Call everyone over right now. Hank laughed heartily, relaxing a little for once. The situation is urgent. After setting aside what we need for farming, distribute the rest of the heart-shaped herb to everyone. Jean nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. Not long after the message was sent out, footsteps echoed through the room. Fenris arrived first, with Stark in tow. So this is your lab? Tony looked around from side to side, taking in the surroundings. Judging from the equipment and data alone, he could easily gauge the skill level of the lab's owner. Not bad. Never thought there'd be a mutant genius who could almost keep up with me. Kid, mutants saved your life. A dry voice drifted over from not far away. Fenris turned toward it and saw that Magneto had already been waiting there. At the moment, he was sitting calmly in a chair, holding a thick book in his left hand, while an invisible force quietly flowed over his right hand. The skin that had loosened and aged with time was visibly tightening again, only to slacken once more a moment later. With every cycle of tightening and relaxing, Magneto's muscles seemed to be gradually growing fuller as well. You're... Seeing this, Tony narrowed his eyes. After a brief sound of surprise, he instinctively stepped closer. Just a trivial little trick. Magneto spoke blandly. Electromagnetic force was everywhere. Compared to the macroscopic world, its role on the microscopic level was actually even greater, and far harder to ignore. As his control over magnetic fields became more and more refined, Magneto had gradually begun discovering subtler applications for that power. Strengthening his own body was one of them. If nothing unexpected happened, then before long, he might even be able to restore both himself and Professor X to youth. Oh. Tony was not annoyed in the slightest. Instead, he watched with growing thoughtfulness. So it can be used like that too. I wonder if I can. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 101, 101. 1,379 words. Fenris, are these the robots you ran into in the Arctic? After giving Magneto a long look, Tony Stark quickly fixed his gaze on the massive sentinel standing in the middle of the lab. Yes, but not exactly. Fenris walked over. This was his first time seeing a sentinel after it had been taken apart. This should be the most advanced version so far. Tony Stark. Hank rose to his feet at the sound, a trace of confusion in his eyes as he looked at Fenris. Why did you bring him here? I'm Fenris's friend. Why shouldn't I be here? Unless you're worried I'm going to hurt you. Tony immediately picked up on the faint exclusion in Hank's tone toward him as a human. He pointed at the Sentinel. I don't even need to ask. This thing was built specifically to deal with mutants, wasn't it? How do you know that? Hank whipped his head toward Fenris. The implication was obvious. Fenris didn't tell me. I figured it out myself. Tony stared at the Sentinel's internal structure and rapped his knuckles against its shell, utterly certain of himself. This material was obviously chosen to counter Magneto. Combined with the battle footage I saw earlier from satellite surveillance, it can even mimic different mutant abilities for targeted combat. Am I right? I haven't seen the core code, but I can still guess most of its underlying logic. As he spoke, Tony simply stuck his head into the Sentinel's chest cavity, as if he meant to see straight through it. You could tell all that just from this. The look in Hank's eyes changed at once. He had not expected this notorious playboy, whose reputation in the outside world was hardly flattering, to have such solid technical skill. That's it. The person who designed this really is a genius. But compared to me, he's still nowhere close. A moment later, Tony pulled back with a look of disdain. If I were designing it, I could get this machine to the level they'd reach after at least 5 more iterations. In only a few moments, Tony had already seen through the Sentinel inside and out. Even Hank, who had been studying the Sentinels for quite some time, could not help feeling impressed by Tony's sharp eye and vast reservoir of knowledge. You're absolutely right. Hank nodded, sincerely impressed. But identifying materials usually requires specialized testing. How did you determine that so quickly? Tony's gaze flicked discreetly toward Magneto nearby. Because once you remove magnetic interference from the equation, this is the strongest and most versatile material that can currently be manufactured. If he were treating Magneto as a hypothetical enemy, it would have been his first choice too. Then do you have any ideas for dealing with this material? Now that Tony had proven he really did know what he was talking about, Hank hurriedly pressed the question. What made the Sentinels so hard to deal with, aside from their unpredictable mimicry when operating in swarms, was the sheer defensive power granted by their tough outer shell. Most mutant abilities had a hard time inflicting any real damage on them. Well, understanding the principle was one thing. Coming up with a practical combat counter was something else entirely. Tony frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly his eyes lit up. I do. You do? The moment Tony said that, even Magneto paused what he was doing. I don't know whether you've heard of a miraculous metal called vibranium. Tony gave a brief explanation. Vibranium is an extraordinary metal. It can absorb all kinds of outside energy. When I was younger, curiosity got the better of me, so I hacked into a top-secret US database and learned about the existence of adamantium. One of its primary raw materials is vibranium. Adamantium is unbelievably hard, and once it sets, it's almost impossible to damage. Based on my analysis of its chemical structure, weapons made from adamantium become exceptionally sharp when heated to high temperatures. They could absolutely cut through this kind of shell. At that, Tony instinctively shook his head. The only problem is that vibranium is just too expensive and too rare. Using it on a large scale. Vibranium. The moment he heard the name, Hank's expression turned strange. He was hardly unfamiliar with adamantium either. Logan's entire skeleton was made of the stuff. But after being fused with Logan's healing factor, that adamantium seemed to have undergone some kind of unusual change. Hank had never studied that aspect in detail. After searching so long and so hard for an answer, had it really been right beside him all along? Tony knew that condition was indeed difficult to meet, so he could only offer some consolation. It's fine. They're just machines. If we keep thinking, we'll find a way to deal with them. No. There was no disappointment in Hank's face, nothing like Tony had expected. Instead, his eyes held a strange gleam. What I mean is, vibranium might be the one thing we currently have the least shortage of. While Hank and Tony were enthusiastically discussing how to equip the X-Men with a set of adamantium weapons that could be put into actual combat as soon as possible, the rest of the X-Men had already begun arriving at the lab one after another not long after receiving Jean's message. Fenris. Ororo smiled warmly and nodded to him. What happened? Why'd we all get called here at once? Logan moved to Fenris's side with practiced ease and asked curiously. Relax, Logan. This is definitely a good thing. The moment he arrived, Scott spotted the familiar heart-shaped herbs in the distance and immediately started rubbing his hands together in anticipation. Everyone, the reason we called you here is because Fenris brought back a miraculous plant for us. After confirming that everyone except Professor X had arrived, Jean lifted a hand, and dozens of glowing, mysterious plants floated lightly in front of the group. This is the heart-shaped herb. It can give the person who takes it the physical condition of a peak human. The instant those words fell, silence swept through the room. Peak human condition. At those words, even Tony lost interest in continuing his discussion with Hank. His ears practically twitched as he hurried over to Fenris's side. Is this the surprise you said you were giving me? MHM. Fenris nodded. So. Happy with it? Happy. I'm beyond happy. Tony let out a hushed exclamation, his eyes blazing with delight. The last person to possess peak human physical abilities had appeared decades ago, and that man had gone on to become one of the most beloved superheroes of all time. Captain America. Fenris, thank you. Tony stared at the heart-shaped herb floating in front of Jean without blinking, his breathing quickening. The value of this thing was impossible to measure. With it, he would be able to design suits freely in the future, without constantly being held back by his frail body. According to Wakandan legend, the power of the heart-shaped herb comes from a deity called the Panther God. We don't know whether that legend is true, but when we take this, we should still treat that power with proper respect. Jean repeated the warning several times. Don't let your mind wander. Understood. Understood. Everyone nodded in unison, staring eagerly at the beautiful plants without the slightest attempt to hide their desire. Nothing will probably go wrong, but this is still the first recorded time anyone outside Wakanda has ever taken it, so. Jean's eyes swept across the group. After hesitating for a moment, she finally settled on Logan. Logan, why don't you try first? Fine. I'll do it. With Jean leading the way, Logan entered one of the side labs. In a little while, you'll most likely see some people, or maybe something else. After securing Logan's limbs to the operating table, Jean gently placed the heart-shaped herb into his mouth. Don't be afraid. Face it calmly. After giving a slight nod, Logan closed his eyes, and his breathing soon became slow and even. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 102, 102. 1,314 words. Asleep? Outside the lab, dozens of eyes stared at Logan without blinking, watching for any reaction. Second by second, time passed. A faint blue-violet glow began to flow beneath Logan's skin. As though he were seeing something both familiar and strange, the expression on his face gradually turned confused and tense. Where is this? When the familiar surroundings of Xavier's school faded away, a vast, winding mountain range rose before Logan's eyes. The golden light of sunset spilled across the peaks. Not far away, a lone wooden cabin glowed with a dim yellow light. Logan walked toward the cabin one step at a time. It was as if someone inside had heard the familiar sound of his footsteps outside. The wooden door creaked open, and a delicate-looking blonde woman leaned out from behind it. "Logan?" The moment she saw him, the woman covered her mouth in shock. Her eyes shone brightly, as if lit from within. "I thought I'd never get to see you here in my life. Who are you?" The instant the words left his mouth, Logan saw the light in her eyes go out. "Does Wolverine cry too?" Inside the operating room, Jean silently watched Logan. He looked completely different from the man who usually acted like nothing in the world mattered to him. A single tear slowly slid down from his left eye. It was like a lone wolf who had spent centuries licking his wounds in silence had suddenly found a warm embrace. A thick, suffocating grief began to fill the room. Jean blinked and realized that, at some point, her own eyes had grown damp as well. What did he see? Outside the lab, the excitement and anticipation on everyone's faces had long since vanished. One by one, they fell silent. Tony nudged Fenris's shoulder, his expression complicated. "Someone very, very important to him," Fenris answered softly. "Someone important." Tony's head lowered at once. At some point, his right hand had quietly clenched into a fist, as though he were both hoping for something and dreading it at the same time. "Logan, I'm really, truly so happy to see you again." Beneath the towering Rockies, the fading sun in the sky looked especially bleak against the snow-covered mountains. As daylight dimmed, the woman leaned gently against the man's chest. Her voice was full of contentment, but her once clear face gradually faded into darkness. "No. No. Don't go." As if he had realized something, Logan desperately tried to hold the woman in his arms tighter, but that warmth slipped away little by little before he even noticed. "Go, Logan. Don't think of me anymore. Never, ever come back here again. I love you. I love you most of all." The woman's soft murmur gradually drifted away. On the operating table, Logan's eyes flew open. "No. Kayla." The warm embrace had turned into cold metal restraints. The dim sky before him was replaced by the harsh brightness of the surgical lights. Logan gasped for breath. For some reason, an awful hollowness rose from deep inside him, but it felt as though it had lodged in his throat, leaving him choking with emotion and unable to make a sound. "Logan, are you okay?" A gentle voice sounded beside his ear as Jean reached out and lightly touched his face. "No, no." A flood of indescribable bitterness surged through his mind. Logan stared blankly at Jean. "No." A furious, unwilling roar exploded from him. An immense force burst from Logan's body, and a pair of steel claws shot out with a snap. Gorgeous, savage blue-violet patterns shimmered across the icy blades. But Logan seemed not to notice any of it. The specially made restraints were sliced apart with ease. Jean only felt a violent gust of wind rush past her. In the next instant, Logan had already vanished from the lab. Outside the lab, everyone looked at each other. The power of the heart-shaped herb was undeniably incredible, but obtaining it clearly did not come easily. If even a hardman like Wolverine had ended up like this, then what about the rest of them? Who wants to go next? Jean steadied her emotions. With a surge of telekinesis, the scattered metal fragments on the floor reassembled themselves, restoring everything to its original state under a wash of dark red light. "Tony." Fenris tugged at Tony's shoulder, trying to shove him forward. But after seeing Logan's reaction, Tony seemed rooted to the floor, unwilling to move even half a step. "Fenris. I need a minute." Tony's voice was almost pleading. Fenris heard him and could only shrug, choosing to respect his wishes. "Fenris, why don't you go?" Seeing that everyone else was hesitant, Jean turned to him instead. "Me?" Fenris pointed at himself with a blank look. Jean actually wanted him to take the heart-shaped herb. For everyone else, the boost to peak human physical ability might be a transformation from head to toe. For him, though, it would barely amount to anything at all. "Try it. Everyone gets a share." Jean summoned a heart-shaped herb into her hand and urged him on. And you're the strongest one here. Everyone trusts you the most. MHM, MHM. The moment Jean said that, voices of agreement rose all around them. Good luck, Teacher Fenris. Fenris glanced back. Pyro looked like he practically wanted to glue his eyes to him. All right. Fenris shook his head with an amused smile, then walked into the lab and lay down without hesitation. Fenris, don't resist it. Keep your emotions under control. With Logan's example right in front of them, Jean repeated the warning several times. Once you lose control, this whole place could be destroyed. So don't let yourself drown in the past and lose your way, understood? Don't worry. Fenris gave her a reassuring look. Good. Jean nodded, and a heart-shaped herb slowly floated into Fenris's mouth. He swallowed it in one bite, smacked his lips, and savored it for a moment. A little sweet. That's not right. Why isn't he asleep yet? Several minutes passed. Jean stared at Fenris, whose eyes were still bright and alert, and her brow furrowed deeply. Fenris, do you feel anything at all? I do feel a little something. Fenris carefully sensed the changes happening inside his body. A faint warm current was rising from deep within him, as if it were slowly spreading through every part of his body. Then, the atomic furnace that had been sitting quietly inside him suddenly seemed to take offense at something. Without warning, it began to roar into motion. Fenris's body temperature spiked along with it. 70 degrees. Fenris's body's instinctive counterattack came so suddenly that Jean, who had been nervously watching the instruments, went pale on the spot. The instant he heard her cry out, Hank dropped everything in his hands and rushed over without the slightest hesitation. It's only 70 degrees. It's fine. Watching the two of them panic, Fenris waved a hand. His body temperature had long since become more of a decorative number than anything meaningful. Forget 70 degrees. Even if it shot up to 700 someday, there would be nothing surprising about it. Before long, that warm current brought on by the heart-shaped herb was completely consumed, and Fenris's body returned to normal as well. Fenris, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Seeing that, Jean finally let out a breath of relief, and hurriedly asked. A little sleepy. A wave of drowsiness suddenly washed over him. Deep within his consciousness, the Titan encyclopedia trembled, ready to disperse the sudden sleepiness. Don't stop it. Fenris's thoughts stirred, and he gently closed his eyes. He wanted to see exactly what he would be shown. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 103, 103. 1,287 words. With Fenris stopping it, the Titan encyclopedia gradually settled down, and the flow of time around him seemed to freeze in that very instant. A rare sense of ease and calm welled up in his heart. Other than that, there was no discomfort at all. It felt as though he were lying atop a clear river. Fenris let his consciousness drift quietly downstream with the current, surrendering himself to the stillness of the moment. He had no idea how much time had passed. Then, as the sound of rushing water gradually grew louder, Fenris's eyes snapped open. Splash! His powerful body burst up from the water. Straightening from a river that reached his waist, Fenris swept his gaze across his surroundings, and a world filled with emptiness and void slowly entered his sight. Brilliant starlight poured down from above, illuminating the barren land in stark clarity. The winding river came from some faraway horizon and flowed onward into the unreachable distance, stretching endlessly beyond sight. Not far from Fenris, a low hill cast a deep shadow beneath the stars. Where is this? How did I end up here? Fenris wandered aimlessly, looking around. On the silent earth, there was not the slightest trace of life. Forget humans. It was as if even plants had gone extinct here. I'd almost rather be seeing Stryker. Beating that old bastard up one more time would still be better than wandering around this place with no clue where I'm going. After searching for a while and finding nothing, Fenris let out a sigh. Human, you did not come from Wakanda. And who is this striker? A majestic female voice rang out through the space without warning, echoing over and over in Fenris's ears. At that moment, Fenris had just sent his consciousness deep into his mind, preparing to use the Titan Encyclopedia's power to leave this place. The instant the voice reached him, his whole body jolted, and he instinctively dropped into a defensive stance. Boom! When Fenris failed to respond, the hill in the distance suddenly moved with a thunderous crash. In the night, its true form gradually revealed itself before his eyes. Two bright eyes opened, dazzlingly beautiful beneath the dim starlight. Gracefully stretching out her long limbs, an enormous black panther the size of a hill began walking toward Fenris with elegant poise. You are different from the others who consumed the heart-shaped herb. The black panther stopped close enough that her shadow completely swallowed Fenris's figure. She studied him with an unreadable look. You are stronger than they were. The panther goddess. Bast? Fenris was startled. At last, he recognized the Black Panther before him. Bast was the panther spirit worshipped by Wakanda for generations, the one said to bestow the Black Panther with all manner of miraculous power. He had never expected that while everyone else who consumed the heart-shaped herb saw their family, lovers, or friends, he would instead meet this powerful goddess directly. Answer my question. An endless pressure of divinity radiated from Bast as she lowered her head and looked down at Fenris from above. I did not come from Wakanda. As for Stryker, he's just an old friend of mine. We know each other very, very well. With Bast blocking out the stars, darkness fell over him. Fenris tilted his head up and met her probing gaze without the slightest fear. A mortal dares look directly upon a god. You disrespect the divine. You must be punished. The moment Fenris finished speaking, a wave of piercing cold surged in from all directions. Perhaps it was because she had not seen the reverence in his eyes that the Black Panthers of the past had shown, or perhaps because he was not Wakandan. Bast gave a heavy snort. Her sleek, powerful forepaw lifted and slammed down without warning. Oddly enough, there was very little killing intent in her eyes. Instead, they gleamed with curiosity, as if she were actually looking forward to Fenris striking back. Bang! A tremendous impact rang out. Bast's forepaw had only just come down when it felt as though it had smashed into steel. A powerful resistance surged up, completely nullifying the force of her strike. The instant her paw made contact, she felt an intense, scorching heat, like plunging it into molten lava, and instinctively jerked it back. Roar! In the next moment, an earth-shaking roar exploded through the air. A violent wave of sound rolled outward with sky-piercing fury, and in an instant, the entire space trembled beneath that wrath. The roar lingered for a long, long time. What? This human from outside Wakanda was completely different from every Black Panther before him. Bast had only sensed the power inside him, and on a whim, decided to toy with him a little and test him out. She never would have imagined that such a casual probe would trigger such a terrifying counterattack. Under her disbelieving gaze, Fenris's body, which had looked so tiny to her just moments ago, began swelling at an astonishing speed. A darkness so dense it was almost tangible blocked out the starlight above and completely enveloped her. Against Fenris's looming form, her hill-sized body suddenly looked shockingly small. In the blink of an eye, Fenris's form surged upward, and a colossal creature nearly 1,000 meters tall crashed into existence. His massive body was like an insurmountable mountain. His rough hide glimmered with a dreadful purple-black sheen, and a dead, oppressive aura steamed from it and spread through the air. Sharp spines ran all the way down his thick, elongated tail. The brilliant blue light that once shone across them had now dimmed, replaced by flickering radiation and an interwoven glow of blue and black. What had seemed like a boundless world now felt cramped and narrow beneath the presence of the beast. Under the brilliant stars, it was as though heaven and earth contained nothing except him. And only moments after the giant beast appeared, the deathly, despairing aura emanating from his body had already filled every corner of the space. In an instant, even the river of stars above seemed to be veiled by a layer of ash, fading into dullness. This kind of power. Fenris had never imagined that, with the help of the Titan Encyclopedia, he could unleash such terrifying strength in this strange realm. Endless energy surged toward him from every part of the space, and Fenris devoured those heaven-sent gifts with ravenous hunger. That 1,000-meter-tall body granted him a horrifying power he had never experienced before. Even the slightest movement of his feet made the entire land quake violently, letting out groans, as if it were buckling under the strain. With a shrill scream through the air, his monstrous tail only needed to flick once to split the earth open with terrifying cracks. It's incredible. This is what real power feels like. Feeling the cataclysmic might hidden in every movement, and sensing the eerie aura of corrosion and devouring spread around him like a tide, Fenris instinctively clenched his claws. Beneath the stars, the sharp talons flashed with a chilling gleam. No. My power. What are you? Under that silent, insidious influence, Bast could feel her body being corroded, assimilated, and erased bit by bit. The strength that had endured through countless ages without ever fading was now beginning to decay. As she felt her body shrinking little by little, Bast finally panicked. She leaped high into the air and slashed viciously at Fenris without holding back in the slightest. Give me back my power. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 104, 104. 1,307 words. Bang. A soft impact rang out, and Fenris felt an itch on his leg. It was like being frantically clawed at by a half-grown kitten. He lowered his head slightly and saw a small black panther clinging to his calf with great difficulty. Because his body was constantly radiating that power of devouring and destruction, Bast's own strength was being eroded by it, pouring uncontrollably into Fenris like a broken dam flooding into him. You're basically a bandit. You barged into my divine realm and stole my stuff. Do you have any sense of reason at all? Give me back my power. Give it back. Before long, as every bit of divine power in her body was drained away, the force behind Bast's swiping paw grew weaker and weaker. So this is the power of a god. As that divine energy entered his body, Fenris felt a warm current flow through him. It was nearly identical to the sensation of swallowing the heart-shaped herb, only vaster and far purer. Watching Bast finally lose all strength and fall from his leg, Fenris casually reached out with his right claw and precisely caught the back of her neck, lifting her up. The dignity of a god must not be defiled. Let me go. Let go. The moment she realized she had been lifted by a giant claw, Bast began struggling on instinct. But her weak resistance only made it clearer just how pointless it was. Fenris's claw did not move in the slightest. In the next instant, Bast found herself staring into a pair of cold eyes glowing with violet light, her own reflection clearly mirrored within them. You let go. The moment their eyes met, Bast felt a chill run down her spine. The beast's body radiated a terrifying heat, but the gaze in its eyes was colder than ice. Her sharp rebuke died in her throat before she could finish it. It felt as if those enormous claws only needed to twitch slightly for the beast's power of destruction to crush her completely. After living for so many ages, Bast was once again feeling the threat of death for the first time in a very long time. She shuddered violently, and an ingratiating smile immediately appeared on her dark feline face. I really wasn't trying to attack you just now. Seeing that Fenris still gave no reaction at all, Bast's smile froze. Almost pleading now, she hurried to explain, it was just that your aura was too tempting. I got curious, that's all. Really? I swear it. Bast gazed pitifully into Fenris's eyes, sincerity and pleading written all over her face. If there was even a single lie in what I just said, then let me lose all my faith forever and be reduced to nothing but ash. A moment later, she still received no response. Just as Bast was sinking fully into despair, a huge force suddenly struck her without warning. Bang! Before Bast could even react, she had already been flung away, her body crashing heavily onto the ground. What a weak god. Fenris glanced casually at the panther goddess sprawled on the ground, limp and powerless, then swept his eyes over the surrounding space. The once vast and boundless land had, at some point, become riddled with devastation. Even the stars overhead had dimmed dramatically. Time to go. This place was, after all, Bast's divine realm, a manifestation of her own divine power. Sensing that the Titan encyclopedia had once again gone still, Fenris reluctantly savored that intoxicating sense of power one last time. Then, with a thought, his colossal body began shrinking rapidly. With the giant beast no longer blotting everything out, the dim starlight poured down once more. In the distance, Bast suddenly felt her vision brighten, and a handsome man reappeared before her eyes. She watched as that man gave her a smile full of unreadable meaning, then vanished from the realm without warning. Once again, the divine realm fell into complete silence. Everything had changed, and yet somehow, everything felt exactly the same. When Fenris opened his eyes again, the bright, almost blinding light overhead came back into view. The familiar surroundings around him made him slowly let out a breath. That overwhelming sensation of power, the kind that could destroy heaven and earth with the lift of a hand, was gone without a trace. In its place came an abrupt sense of emptiness and loss. Thankfully, the divine power that had belonged to the panther goddess still remained inside him. A surging warm current filled every corner of his body, circulating endlessly and bringing with it an indescribable sense of fullness. Meanwhile, the atomic furnace within him was running at full speed, racing to assimilate that power. But without the support of the divine realm, Fenris's current strength alone would still need quite a long time to completely refine all that divine energy. In other words, for a good stretch of the future, his power would enter a period of rapid expansion, right up until every last trace of the panther goddess's power had been fully assimilated and exhausted. So this is basically a direct admission ticket to godhood. Recalling the power the panther goddess had displayed, Fenris could not help blinking. If this had happened before, having such an ocean of divine power inside him would probably have made him pass out from excitement. But now, it's only so, I guess. It was easy to grow used to luxury, and hard to go back afterward. Fenris gave a low chuckle and sat up, though the delight on his face was impossible to hide. Fenris, how was it? Not far away, seeing that he had finally come back to himself, Jean hurried over and asked with concern written all over her face. I definitely gained a lot. Fenris nodded with a smile. I didn't expect that even with your level of strength, you'd still benefit this much from the heart-shaped herb. Jean looked him over in surprise. Seeing that his emotions were steady, that there were no abnormalities in his body other than his temperature having risen a little more, and that he had not lost control emotionally the way Logan had, Jean finally relaxed. She waved toward the people outside. Who's next? Come in. Me. It seemed he had finally done enough mental preparation. Once he got the signal, Tony gritted his teeth, and at last stepped forward first. Wait a second. Seeing Tony's attempt at calm, Fenris suddenly spoke up and stopped him. Tony, not yet. Why? Tony froze. Now that he had finally worked up the nerve, why was Fenris stopping him instead? Tony's too weak. He's not suited to taking the heart-shaped herb right now. Thinking of the devastated state Bast's divine realm was currently in, Fenris lowered his voice. Now he had really offended the panther goddess badly. Yes, she had been the one to test him and strike first, but the fact remained that he had nearly destroyed her divine realm, and almost wiped out the accumulation of countless ages in the process. Now they were basically preparing to send an entire group to ask her for blessings and power. Who knew whether, in a fit of anger, she might do something extreme? For everyone else to safely take the heart-shaped herb afterward, someone strong enough has to go and persuade her first. Fenris kept turning the thought over in his mind. Fenris. Jean waved a hand in front of his eyes. What are you thinking about? I was thinking. Fenris had barely gotten halfway through the sentence when his previously distant gaze suddenly locked directly onto Jean. Ha! End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 105, 105. 1,363 words. What does strength have to do with taking the heart-shaped herb? Although Tony did not understand why Fenris was stopping him, he still chose without hesitation to trust him. Fenris, are you sure you want me to do it? Jean stared into Fenris's eyes, her face full of confusion. That's right. And it has to be you. Fenris nodded with absolute certainty, then changed the subject. How much control do you have over your power now? The professor said you don't lose control easily anymore. More or less. Jean thought it over seriously for a moment. The Phoenix personality has completely gone dormant. It's almost impossible for it to erupt again on its own, and I've mostly adapted to that power by now. Using 10 or 20% of it shouldn't be a problem. As she spoke, Jean seemed a little embarrassed. It was her own power, and yet after spending so much time and effort adapting to it, she could still only draw out a very small part of it. That's enough. Fenris made a silent comparison in his mind, and the tension in his brow finally eased. The power of the Phoenix was obvious to anyone. Even if Jean could use only a small fraction of it, that was still enough to push her strength to a truly terrifying level. Jean, if you see a giant black panther in a little while, or maybe a woman who looks a little rough, then you should. Before placing the heart-shaped herb into Jean's mouth, Fenris leaned in close and quietly instructed her over and over by her ear. Okay. Jean gave Fenris a deep look, then slowly closed her eyes. At the same time, within the divine realm of the Panther Goddess. After lying on the ground to rest for a while and finally recovering a bit of strength, Bast staggered back to her feet. A flash of black light passed over her, and she quietly shifted into a human form. Looking at the divine realm she had painstakingly maintained for countless ages, now reduced to this ruined state, Bast felt like her heart was bleeding. Smack! On the verge of tears, she slapped herself across the face, and bitterly regretted ever getting handsy enough to provoke that man in the first place. Well, great. My divine power's been drained dry, and who knows how long it'll take to recover. Even the divine realm got sucked into this state. Bast resisted the urge to slap herself again. After slowly calming down, she finally forced herself back upright and silently tried to cheer herself on. It's fine. The divine realm is still here. The foundation isn't damaged. I can recover it slowly. You can do this. After a round of mental preparation, Bast's mood had finally started to improve, and she was just about to get some proper rest when another unfamiliar presence appeared in the divine realm. Who now? Bast shook her head impatiently and snapped in irritation. What was going on with Wakanda today? Why were so many people coming to bother her? Hello. An equally powerful pressure began spreading from afar. The moment she sensed that force, and felt her divine realm start trembling on the verge of collapse again, Bast's expression changed instantly. A moment later, a tall, beautiful woman walked over, her red hair blazing like fire. Panther Goddess Bast, it is an honor to meet you. Red light flickered in the woman's eyes, yet she wore a friendly smile on her face. A very bad feeling suddenly rose in Bast's chest. No way, right? She's awake. Awake. Jean had remained asleep for an unusually long time. Just as everyone was waiting quietly for her to wake, Tony, who had been staring at the equipment without blinking, suddenly cried out. Jean? How did it go? Fenris blurred forward in a flash and shoved Scott aside from the bedside. Very well. Our negotiations went smoothly. Jean slowly opened her eyes. The ruined sight she had just witnessed inside the divine realm was still vivid in her memory. The deep cracks spanning the earth, the nearly dried-up river, and the unstable distortions in the distant space all made it obvious how much destruction that place had just suffered. From her brief conversation with Bast, even a being as powerful as the Panther Goddess had been strangely evasive whenever Fenris came up. After sitting up on the operating table, Jean glanced at Fenris with visible interest. "I'm genuinely curious how you managed to cause that much destruction. If we'd known you had that kind of strength, why would we be afraid of the Sentinels? Why would we be afraid of Bolivar?" "I don't know either. It all happened because Bast wanted to test me by attacking me." Fenris spread his hands, then asked, "What did she say?" "I'm not her match right now, but she seems to be extremely wary of the power inside me." Jean thought back carefully. "But maybe because of that, our conversation went very smoothly. But that part isn't important. Our goal has already been achieved." Under Jean's control, all the heart-shaped herbs floated down precisely into each person's hands. She smiled slightly and said to the group, "With Fenris and me watching over things, there's no need for everyone to take them one at a time." "Jean, what exactly happened? Why the sudden change?" Scott stepped forward, took his girlfriend's hand, and looked at her in confusion. "What Bast? What conversation? What deal?" "Don't ask. Just listen to me first." Jean looked at Scott gently and fed a heart-shaped herb into his mouth. "Don't worry. If you're lucky, everyone might even have a chance to receive an extra blessing. I'm doing it." Watching Scott drift off in Jean's arms, and after getting an affirming look from Fenris, Tony gritted his teeth and swallowed the heart-shaped herb in his hand without hesitation. "Fenris, wish me luck." John rushed straight to Fenris's side. His eyes rolled back, and he quickly lost consciousness. "What a reckless kid." Fenris chuckled and helped Pyro onto a nearby bed. "We're taking ours too." After a brief flurry of wrestling, it did not take long before every operating table in the lab was occupied by sleeping X-Men. "These are the future of mutant kind." Magneto held the heart-shaped herb in his hand and looked at the sleeping young faces, his expression full of satisfaction. "You're really not going to take it?" Fenris looked at Magneto in surprise. "I don't like relying on outside power." Magneto shook his head lightly. He raised one hand and held it out in front of Fenris. The wrinkles in his formerly aged skin had already faded quite a bit, and it had regained elasticity and luster. "This is something bestowed by a god. Compared to gods, I'd rather trust my own power and the most basic physical laws of this world. So what if it gives someone a dozen tons of strength?" Magneto smiled openly, his tone full of powerful confidence. "It won't be long before I can do that on my own. I hope it turns out the way you think." Fenris shrugged and did not press the matter further. He knew how stubborn Magneto was. Besides, compared to something truly granted by a god, what they had received felt more like something they had seized by force. Magneto said nothing more. He simply waited in silence with Fenris, and before long the lab grew completely quiet. "What new energy source?" "Isotopes." A moment later, a murmur so soft it was almost inaudible came from nearby. Fenris's ears twitched, and he instinctively turned to look at Tony. After taking the heart-shaped herb, Tony seemed to have seen someone. The expression on his face had shifted from his initial excitement and shock into grievance and confusion. He was clearly a mature middle-aged man, yet right now Tony looked almost like a child. "Even at a time like this, you still can't stop lecturing me." End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 106, 106. 1,223 words. So he's still just a rebellious kid who never grew up. Magneto had heard Tony's sleep-talking too. He quietly moved up beside Fenris. The two of them watched the billionaire's stubborn little expression together, both looking thoroughly amused. People always found it easier to like someone they had helped. And Tony had done quite a bit for mutants lately, so Magneto was actually rather fond of him. All adults were children once. Tony being like this is perfectly normal. Fenris shrugged, then shot back, what about you? Don't you have a few kids yourself? My children. Magneto stroked his chin and thought for a moment, but in the end he said nothing. He only fell silent and walked off to one side. All right, all right. Nobody has it easy. Seeing that Magneto did not want to talk about it, Fenris could only shake his head. He opened a dimensional portal, reached in, and pulled out 2 miniature arc reactors. After tossing them in his hand a couple of times, he sat down out of boredom and began absorbing from them. So getting stronger means hard training, and I still have to read books too. What's so good about reading? Lying down and sleeping is way more comfortable. Inside him, Bast's divine power was being steadily refined. Outside him, the arc reactors were feeding him an endless stream of radiation. With both working at once, the warm sensation filling his body made Fenris narrow his eyes in contentment, a comfortable hum escaping his lips. What an unreasonable brat. Magneto curled his lip, then expertly pulled out a pen from his chest pocket, and began writing and sketching again. After Fenris and Jean had successively visited Bast, everyone else who consumed the heart-shaped herb remained asleep for an unusually long time. Blue-violet light, sometimes bright and sometimes dim, glowed beneath their skin, giving them an almost dreamlike beauty. Time slipped away quietly to the soft scratch of Magneto's pen. Then, who knew how long later, a pained groan suddenly sounded from nearby. Scott. Seeing her boyfriend's cries of pain growing louder and louder, Jean immediately put down what she was doing and hurried over. It hurts. Scott's body suddenly began to twist. In the next moment, even the ruby quartz glasses on his face began glowing red. Scott. Calm down. Breathe deeply. Breathe deeply. Jean stepped forward, wrapped him in her arms, and soothed him gently. But instead of calming him, her words only seemed to worsen his pain. Ah! Scott's eyes flew open. ZZT. A thick optic beam shot out from his eyes. At first, the beam was reflected again and again through the ruby quartz lenses, held firmly inside the glasses. But very quickly, as Scott's optic blasts grew more and more violent, the specially made glasses Hank had built finally reached their limit. With a sharp cracking sound, the expensive ruby quartz shattered. Damn it! Not far away, seeing that the out-of-control optic blast was about to tear straight through the laboratory, Fenris moved the instant before the ruby quartz broke. His hand swept behind his lower back, and without hesitation, he hurled the compact battle axe. Amid the shriek of splitting air, the axe rapidly expanded in midair. Its broad blade swung into place just as the optic beam broke free, precisely blocking its path. A ceaseless torrent of optic energy poured into the battle axe. As time passed, the axe blade, which had originally glowed deep blue, now began shining with a crimson glow. Scott's rampage continued for several full minutes. At last, with a relieved sigh, the red light in his eyes gradually faded. Fenris lifted a hand, and the battle axe flew straight back into his palm without hesitation. As the haft gave a faint tremor, Fenris sent a wave of pleasure from it, as though even after absorbing that much energy, it still was not satisfied. Scott, what's going on with you? After putting the axe away, Fenris stepped forward. Scott had already regained his senses, and was now staring silently at his own hands. So this is what the world looks like through normal eyes. Scott muttered to himself. The ruby quartz glasses had given him the key to controlling his power, but they had also turned the whole world in his eyes into a sea of red. After all these years, he had never imagined that one day he would be able to see the world's colors again. Thank you, Fenris. After quietly feeling the explosive physical strength now surging through his body, Scott completely ignored Jean standing nearby. He casually removed the broken remains of the glasses he had once been unable to sleep without, leaped down from the operating table, and pulled Fenris into a fierce hug. Honestly, brother, you looked cooler with the glasses on. Fenris smiled faintly. After teasing him a little, he patted Scott on the shoulder. I'm happy for you too. Looks like all the effort Jean spent talking sense into Bast had not been wasted after all. Bast is a good person. Fenris nodded inwardly. Boom. Before one wave had even settled, another rose. Scott was still clutching Jean in excitement when Fenris, just as he was about to turn back, suddenly felt a surge of scorching heat from not far away. John? Unlike Scott, Pyro had not gone berserk. He was lying quietly on the operating table, while terrifying heat formed countless rippling distortions in the air for several meters around him. Fenris walked straight through it without changing expression. With a flicker of movement, he appeared beside Pyro. At some point, Pyro's skin had become covered in dense blue-violet patterns, strange and intricate to the eye. Flames were rising off his skin, making him look like a genuine man of fire. These markings. Fenris stared at the patterns on Pyro's skin without blinking, finding them oddly familiar. Why do they look kind of like magic from a completely different system? A moment later, as the flames grew larger and larger, nearly rising several meters high, Pyro finally opened his eyes. Teacher Fenris. The instant he opened them and saw Fenris's familiar face, Pyro immediately grinned. But in the next second, the surging flames on his body made him nearly jump out of his skin. Don't move. These flames can't hurt you. Fenris reached out, passed his hand straight through the flames, and pressed it to Pyro's shoulder. Only then did the boy calm down. This is... I can create fire out of thin air now. Pyro stared over and over at his own body. These blazing, high-temperature flames were appearing from nowhere, yet they did not harm him in the slightest. A moment later, Pyro finally accepted reality, and the delight surging through his eyes became impossible to suppress. That damn lighter, I'll never need you again. Pyro let out a shout, then without hesitation flung away the lighter he had once cherished so much. He flipped upright from the bed in one smooth motion. Completely ignoring the blazing flames still burning over his body, he leaped up and threw himself at Fenris. Teacher Fenris, I love you so much. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 107, 107. 1236 words. EU. Stay away from me. As Pyro came flying at him, Fenris might not have feared the flames, but he still looked thoroughly disgusted as he sidestepped, making John miss completely. You think the lab is a place for you to play with fire? Fenris grabbed Pyro by the back of the neck and tossed him straight out of the lab. Go find somewhere to get used to your powers first. Those sentinels are going to be a nightmare for you soon enough. Got it. I'm on it. John was not offended in the slightest. Grinning from ear to ear, he picked up his lighter and ran off. Watching the young X-Men's mutant abilities undergo such dramatic leaps after taking the heart-shaped herb, Magneto finally could not sit still anymore. He quietly moved over beside Fenris. Fenris, this heart-shaped herb can strengthen mutant abilities too. What? Feeling tempted now, old man? Fenris instantly understood what Magneto was thinking, and gave him an amused look. A little, yes. Caught by Fenris's teasing eyes, Magneto coughed lightly and looked away with some embarrassment. After all, he had just declared in front of Fenris that he would never rely on external power like this. It can, yes, but the effect on you would probably be limited. Fenris did not have the heart to keep pressing an old man's pride. Normally, the heart-shaped herb doesn't do this. But what? Magneto asked immediately. Jean and I just had a very friendly discussion with the god Wakanda worships. After a full exchange of views, the Panther goddess agreed to give us a little special consideration. As he said that, Fenris spread his hands with complete confidence. But the stronger the ability, the harder it is to enhance. For someone like Pyro, making him able to create fire isn't difficult for a god. But once your power is fully developed, you might not end up much weaker than the Panther Goddess herself, so. Fenris gave Magneto a mildly regretful shrug. You get it. So in the end, I still have to rely on myself. Magneto was too sharp not to catch the meaning underneath Fenris's words. While the two were talking, several more mutants nearby woke up one after another. Just as Fenris had said, as X-Men, they were already the elite among the elite. Each of their powers ranked near the top even among mutants. Because of that, most of their abilities did not change very much. Take Bobby, for example. Other than his physical strength becoming a bit stronger, there was nothing especially unusual about him. Beast, on the other hand, gained the ability to freely control his own form. But he was no longer the young man he had once been, obsessively concerned about his appearance, so after a brief moment of excitement, he threw himself right back into work. Magneto took in all of these changes, and the facts proved that Fenris had been completely right. I knew it. In the end, everything still depends on yourself. Not even a god can change that. Without hesitation, Magneto put away the heart-shaped herb he had just taken out. I'll save it instead. For my son. Ha! Seeing Magneto go back on his word so quickly, Fenris laughed out loud. Magneto had many daughters, but only one son. The only question was whether he knew about Quicksilver yet. And if this Quicksilver still could not outrun a bullet, then maybe he really did need a heart-shaped herb. The two of them kept chatting off and on like that, and by the time the conversation drifted to a pause, all the X-Men had already awakened. The sudden surge in power left them thrilled beyond words. After coming over to talk with Fenris for a bit, every last one of them rushed off to the training grounds. Who would have thought Tony, the only ordinary human here, would be the slowest? At this point, Tony Stark was the only one left on an operating table. And his expression was unbelievably complicated, as if he had just suffered some enormous emotional blow. Fenris, are you there? Who knew how much time had passed? Fenris was reclining lazily in a lounge chair, one arc reactor in each hand, when Tony's voice suddenly came from nearby, soft as a mosquito's buzz. I'm here. Fenris answered lazily, but did not get up. Fenris, do me a favor. With Jean's help, Tony shakily undid the metal restraints around his body. No one knew what exactly he had said to Howard Stark, but Tony had completely lost the longing and anticipation for superhuman power he had shown before. His face was pale, drained of all color. How could taking the heart-shaped herb leave someone in this kind of state? As Tony staggered toward him, trembling all over, Fenris quickly stood up and caught him. What happened to you? I saw my father. And my mother. Tony's nose stung, and his eyes turned wet almost instantly. His voice broke as he said, just now, my father told me that I was his greatest invention. Tony's hand gripped Fenris's shoulder, all 10 fingers trembling faintly. His emotions were on the verge of collapse. The pride that had once been carved into his bones had been shattered by a single ordinary sentence from Howard. Fenris fell silent at once. To anyone else, those words might have sounded perfectly ordinary. But for Tony, who had spent his whole life wanting to prove himself in front of his father, hearing those words directly from Howard after so many decades, and finally receiving his father's acknowledgement, carried an unbearable weight. Tony, you should be happy. Fenris patted him on the shoulder, hoping to steady his emotions as quickly as possible. My father left behind a set of research materials for me. The technology of his era wasn't advanced enough to make the idea real, but now I already have the ability to bring it into existence. Tony also realized how badly he had lost control, and kept taking deep breaths to steady himself. But those materials are still in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s possession. I want to bring them back. I'm going to help my father make that dream real. As he spoke, Tony's eyes began to go hollow again. Even though he had spent a long time preparing himself mentally before taking the heart-shaped herb, the moment he truly saw his parents again, he still lost control with shocking ease. Tony, I may not be able to help you with that. Only after Tony's trembling had finally eased did Fenris speak. Mr. Stark's technology is something only you can bring to life. You know that. This isn't my area. No. You can. The moment Fenris finished speaking, Tony's expression changed abruptly. The joy and sorrow in his eyes both twisted into an unprecedented savagery. I know the truth about what happened back then now. My father had already reverse-engineered a new generation of supersoldier serum. But when he and my mother drove away, they were deliberately murdered, and the serum was stolen. It was James Barnes. It was Captain America Steve Rogers' best friend. He killed them. I'm going to take revenge on him. I'm going to kill him with my own hands. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Chapter 108, 108. 1,289 words. On the lawn outside Xavier's school, the patch of turf Tony had torn up earlier had already been restored. At a glance, there was no sign at all that the place had been a complete mess just moments ago. Tony, are you really planning to take revenge by yourself? Watching Tony effortlessly haul the heavy Mark III upright from the ground, Fenris asked with visible concern. James Barnes took the new generation of supersoldier serum Mr. Stark developed from his car back then. If that serum has already been cracked, then odds are you'll be facing several supersoldiers at once. Maybe more. When Tony had first woken up, his emotions had been running so high that he had wanted Fenris to help him get revenge. But once his reason returned, his old pride and stubbornness came roaring back with it. He stopped mentioning it entirely, and insisted on avenging himself through his own strength alone. It's okay, Fenris. Trust me. At Fenris's attempt to talk him out of it, a warmth rose in Tony's chest. You, Ensign, and even Magneto, so many people dragged me back out of hell. How could I not value my own life? I used to have everything, and still have nothing. But now, at the very least, I have you as a friend. Tony smiled faintly. He stepped in front of Fenris and gave him a light hug. Don't worry. I'm not an ordinary person anymore either. They won't be able to do anything to me. Don't do anything reckless. If you run into something you can't handle, call me immediately. Even looking at Tony's confidence, Fenris still could not help worrying. Even if their physical abilities were roughly on the same level, Tony and those Winter soldiers who had gone through hellish combat training could not possibly bring out the same level of actual fighting strength. And the Mark armor still was not fully mature. If Tony tried to take on those battle-hardened, highly experienced super soldiers alone, and his anger got the better of him, and he decided to fight them in close combat with the suit on, the danger of that was almost impossible to overstate. Fenris, do I really look to you like the kind of idiot who doesn't know how to call for backup when he's losing? Tony thumped a hand against his chest and, for once, made a joke. I'm a genius. What is there that even I can't do? Don't worry. I'll investigate slowly, patiently, one step at a time, until the day I drag them all out into the light and wipe them out in one strike. Tony braced the heavy Mark III with one hand and extended the other toward Fenris in invitation. Mr. Fenris Ethereal, a revolutionary invention, is about to appear before your eyes. Would you be interested in sparing just a little bit of time to witness this historic moment with me, and help open a brand new era? This is the key to the future passed down through the Stark family. And if my best friend isn't there beside me to share in the joy of success, then that would be a little too dull. Seeing the anticipation buried deep in Tony's eyes, Fenris smiled in understanding and clasped his hand firmly. Let's go. I definitely want to see how a super genius like you plans to change the world. As tiny prismatic lights began rippling across the space in front of them, the two vanished from where they stood in the very next instant. At the same time, inside the Triskelion, S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Bang! A thick stack of files slammed heavily onto the desk with a dull thud. Something showed up out of nowhere in the Middle East recently. No one even knows what it is, and it's been systematically destroying terrorist weapons depots. It's been this long, and we still don't even know who's behind it. Nick Fury stared at Sitwell without blinking. His voice was calm, but anyone could hear the anger simmering beneath it. If one day that thing turns its attacks on civilians, and we still don't know what the hell it is, what do you think the clowns at the CIA and FBI are going to say about us? Director, this doesn't appear to be a superhuman incident. It's not even within S.H.I.E.L.D's scope of responsibility. Even the military said it's probably just a new type of unmanned aircraft. There's no reason for us to get involved in this at all. So if you ask me. Looking at Nick Fury's face, dark as the bottom of a pot, Sitwell lowered his head and sighed helplessly. Not long ago, Sitwell, who had always worked diligently inside S.H.I.E.L.D., had suddenly been handed several unusually difficult assignments for no obvious reason. Normally, there was no way tasks like those would ever have landed on his desk. At first, he had assumed his Hydra identity had been exposed, and he had even prepared himself for the worst. But the very next day, former S.H.I.E.L.D. director and senior Hydra leader Alexander Pierce had easily learned from an entirely unsuspecting Nick Fury that Sitwell had been given those assignments because Fury had taken notice of him, and was actually considering promoting him. If he could prove his ability in front of Nick Fury, then advancing through S.H.I.E.L.D. would become much, much easier. And the higher his position rose within S.H.I.E.L.D., the more value he would carry within Hydra as well. On top of that, Alexander Pierce was perfectly happy to see one of his subordinates moving up in the world, so after using a few small methods, the difficult missions that ordinary S.H.I.E.L.D. agents could not complete easily were naturally wrapped up successfully by Sitwell. Sure enough, after he met Nick Fury's expectations, Sitwell's promotion speed entered an unprecedented surge. His clearance level jumped by 2 full ranks in a short span, which left him ecstatic. But just as he rolled up his sleeves, ready to do something big, he realized things were not nearly as wonderful as he had imagined. Because of the exceptional ability he had displayed before, more and more difficult missions were now being dropped directly onto his shoulders. For the sake of his advancement, he sometimes had no choice but to cautiously lean on Hydra's resources. Fortunately, Nick Fury had not let all his effort go unrewarded. Caught in that strange torment of pain and satisfaction, Sitwell's rise had only continued accelerating. Sitwell, I thought you were one of the rare capable people around here. What I didn't expect was that you'd actually believe that garbage about it being some kind of aircraft. You tell me. What kind of unmanned aircraft can precisely blow that many weapons depots sky high in such a short amount of time? What kind of aircraft has that kind of endurance? I promoted you because you're smart, capable, and loyal. But your performance this time has been disappointing. Fury let out a sigh. That's enough. You can go. Hearing the deep disappointment and frustration in Fury's voice, Sitwell, who had been lost in thought, suddenly jolted. Director, actually, I do have one other piece of intelligence. The only problem is that its reliability hasn't been confirmed. Sitwell gritted his teeth. Using a little intelligence for the sake of his own advancement. Hydra would understand, right? Oh? Nick Fury's eyes lit up. He had sharply caught the flash of hesitation that crossed Sitwell's face. He had only bluffed a little, and he had actually gotten something out of him. End of chapter. Get plus 30 extra chapters on P at TR3 on Zalem. Every 300 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter drop. Thanks for reading. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.